So imagine that you wake up and you notice that it's a little harder to get out of chairs lately. Or maybe your hand has been tremoring and you don't quite know why that's happening. Or even that people have started to ask you to repeat yourself. You don't feel like you talk any different, but they do more often than you thought they used to. That's what it's like when Parkinson's disease starts. When patients are starting to be diagnosed. But this is a progressive disease, and so it gets worse over time. So those changes to the way that patients are able to walk and communicate and stand and reach become worse over time. And these are the patients that I work with. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I do with them today. So first, I want to get you an idea of what it's like to communicate with Parkinson's disease. So I'm going to play you an audio clip of someone who's fairly severe. I want you to pay attention to a few things. First, I'd like you to pay attention to how weak and quiet her speech is. I want you to also pay attention to how slurred her articulation is, how hard it is to distinguish what she's saying, and how her rate changes. So she talks quickly, and then she'll have a long break. So let's listen to her.
I put salt and pepper on the outside of the bird in different places. And I also put like an inch of water in the pot. So when that water has turned yellow, your chicken should be done.
So imagine that either you communicate, and that's how it sounds when you try to communicate, or imagine communicating with a loved one, and it was that difficult to understand what they were saying. Parkinson's patients are frustrated by communication like that. And the way they respond to that is the way any of us would respond to that. They start to withdraw from social communication situations. They start to not talk to their spouse and their family and their friends. They stop going places. And that leads to social isolation and depression. And what I think what we need to do is think of a way to do better than social isolation. So as speech therapists, we're often working with patients like this, trying to help them be better communicators. And anytime you're a therapist and you're doing work with someone, you need to somehow cue them to do something different. And I'm going to give you an example of that. So one way let's say I wanted you to take a wider step. One way I could do that is I could put tape on the floor and ask you to walk from line to line and give you that kind of what's called an external cue to widen your step. Another way I could do it is I could ask you to think about how wide your step is or how long your step is and make it longer. Which do you think would be easier? Hopefully you're thinking the tape on the floor is going to be easier. That's true for the patients as well. In speech therapy, we use lots of different cues, and I did a study looking at how we might be able to help patients best. And I looked at a really traditional external cue that we use. We used a little box, and it has a number on it, and that number goes up as the patient gets louder. And I asked them to target a certain number. I used a common internal cue. I asked them to think about how loud they usually talked and to talk twice as loud. And I used a unique external cue, a third thing that we don't usually do in speech therapy. I played some noise in the background of the room, and this elicits what's called the Lombard effect. So imagine yourself sitting in a very loud restaurant trying to talk to the person across from you. What are you going to do? I hope that you're thinking you're going to talk louder. You might slow your rate a little. You're going to over-articulate to be a little more clear. And that's what we all do automatically without even thinking about it in noise. That's the Lombard effect. And I found that my patients talked more loudly and more clearly, and they had better support for speech from the perspective of their physiology when they were talking in noise. And I thought to myself, it would be really wonderful if patients with Parkinson's disease could walk around in a little bubble of noise. Only they would hear it, not that no one else around them, and they would be louder and clearer just automatically. And so I talked to a friend of mine who's an engineer, and I said, would something like this be possible? And he said, oh, sure, it'd be really easy. Well, it turns out it's not. Sorry, I'm going to cough. Sorry. It turns out it's not so easy, but it's doable. And what we did was we developed the Speech Vive. You can see it in this, in this person's ear. It looks like a tiny little Bluetooth headset. And what it does is it senses when the person starts to talk with a little accelerometer in their ear, and it plays noise in their ear while they're talking. And that noise sounds a little like this. So it sounds like a lot of people talking at once, and the patients talk in that noise, and when they stop talking, that noise turns off so they can hear the person they're talking to, and they talk louder and more clearly. So let me show you what this looks like. I'm going to play you a video of a patient who has Parkinson's disease, and he has had this disease about 10 years at the point of this video. You'll see the old device in this video, so you'll see how far we've come in developing it. And what you'll notice is you'll first hear him without the device and then with, and there's no change to the audio signal. The change is all in how he changes the way he talks.
This is what Scott sounds like without the device.
Well, the biggest thing about Parkinson's is that to know that you can't do multiple tasks.
And with the device.
When you speak, you get this crowd noise in your ear. It's rather like going into the mall.
So I hope you could hear the difference in his speech. And we find this effect in many patients. So we've studied about 50 patients so far in my laboratory using the device, and we see in about 90% of them improved loudness, rate, and articulation or speech clarity, or some combination of those in about, like I said, 90% of them. So that's really wonderful. And what I'm most proud about is that I feel that my patients can use the device, the Speech Vive device, and go out into their everyday communication contexts and be successful. In traditional therapy, what we do is we bring a patient in, you might have been to physical therapy before, to our office, and we work on things. We work with tasks that mimic what patients and what they're normally doing in their everyday life. And we try to help them carry those abilities that we're teaching them in therapy over into their everyday life. But with patients with Parkinson's disease, sometimes, and not just those patients, many patients, changes in attention or memory make this really hard to do. And so patients can't carry that task, those techniques over into their everyday life, and they feel that they've failed therapy. And I think that's a lost opportunity for us as therapists. I believe that we need to develop more techniques like the Speech Vive that take therapy out of the therapy room, turn a patient's everyday life, their spouse, their family, their social group, their house, into a cue, and just like the noise, a cue to use their techniques more effectively, to communicate better. And I think we want to give our patients more success in their everyday life. We need to find ways for them to feel successful. And the Speech Vive does that. It gives them a chance to be successful communicators and to not need to socially isolate themselves, to reduce their frustration, get them back into communicating, leaving their house, and doing the things that they love the most. In the end, I'd like to dedicate this talk to the first woman who ever used the Speech Vive device, who has since passed away. And what she taught me was that every little idea, no matter how small we think it is, has the opportunity to change someone's life. And that's true even if it's just a little bubble of noise. Thank you.